Star Trek books. They've been around for decades. Join us, the Trek ladies, Kavura and Jen, as we discuss the novels one at a time. Welcome to the Ladies Trek Library.
Okay, hello, we are back with Ladies Trek Library. I'm Kavura, and I'm here with Jen. Hi.
Hey, Kavura, and hey, listeners. I'm really happy to be back.
So, this time we are reviewing Star Trek The Next Generation book, Survivors, by Jean Lorrah. And I'll read the description on the back of the book. Treva, a human colony on the fringes of known space, isolated from the rest of the galaxy, at last report they were on the verge of becoming a true interstellar community, a full-fledged member of the Federation. But now the Enterprise has received a distress signal. Treva is in the throes of a violent revolution, a revolution led by a merciless warlord who has committed countless atrocities in the name of freedom. Data and Tasha Yar are dispatched to investigate, but once they reach Treva, they discover the truth, and any possible solution may be far more complex than a simple rebellion. For Treva's president wants more than Starfleet's good words in her fight against the rebels. She wants their weapons, and before the battle is over, she means to get them, over Data and Yar's dead bodies if necessary. Okay, so that's it. So this is mostly a book about Data and Yar in their own little adventure. And I just want to say, so this book was published in January of 1989. So it was while The Next Generation was still on. It started in 1987. So these books that were written while the show was still on, of course, there's going to be things that happened later on in the show that contradicted the book. We'll start off with the planet New Paris. The book says Tasha is from New Paris, but we did learn later on TNG that the planet she was from was called Turkana 4. But it does have some similarities, because at this point on The Next Generation, they did already know that she was from a planet that had raid gangs, and basically there was no overall government. It was just there were gangs on the planet that did what they wanted to do. And that was the situation on New Paris. The beginning of the book described Tasha on New Paris as a young girl, and it was very disturbing, the life that she had to live, being on her own and not having a family. What did you think about it?
Well, I was really glad to read a book where we got background on Tasha Yar and her childhood, because obviously we didn't, she was killed off fairly early in the series, so we didn't get to spend a lot of time with her. And whereas other characters had more time where you could see episodes that talked more about their past, we didn't have that opportunity with Tasha Yar. So I was excited to read this book. And yeah, we did know a little bit about her home planet from the show, but not a lot. And this gave some insight into what it was like, Turkana 4, but in the book, New Paris. But sort of similar description with a planet that is basically has no government. It's just anarchy with gangs. And, in order to survive, you basically have to join a gang, because you can't survive on your own. And you're constantly, just every day is just a struggle to survive. So the book really depicted that pretty vividly, and what Tasha Yar's childhood was like, which was, pretty difficult, as you can imagine, on a planet like that. She was born to a mother who was a drug addict. They called it joy dust, was what they called the drug. And her mother died when she was fairly young. And she was taken in by an older woman who took care of her until she was a teenager and old enough to kind of get by on her own. And one thing that I found really interesting was that she didn't have a last name. She just knew herself as Tasha. And when she eventually joined Starfleet and had to have a last name, she picked the name Yar because Yar was the name of the woman who took her in after her mother died. So that was an interesting little tidbit we got to see. But yeah, it was a difficult to read section of the book, especially a scene where she's raped and she also has to fear again from these rape gangs. So not a place you really want to live in a sad situation, but I enjoyed reading the chapter and getting to understand more about her life and how that affected who she was as an adult and as a security officer.
I think Jean Lorrah did a good job of world building in this, showing the planet mostly just in the first chapter. Her depiction of it was she was able to extract a lot from the few episodes that had been on TV at the time. And since you mentioned about where she got her name, it kind of reminded me of, the movie Han Solo, where Han Solo had to make up a last name for himself when they asked him, "What's your name?" And he just came up with something. And that's sort of what Tasha Yar did in this for her last name. She just had to come up with a second name for herself. But that was one of the things that it doesn't jive with the show anymore, because when they had Tasha's sister in the episode Legacy, her sister's name was Tasha Yar. So how did her sister get the same last name? Because this book doesn't, at this time we didn't know that Tasha had a sister, so it never mentioned that she had a sister. But things like that you just go with. So it does mention that New Paris was an Earth colony. It was just something that it was a colony that just sort of eventually just dwindled down, and they just weren't able to keep control of it. So now getting on to Tasha Yar in the book, and a lot of things in this was different from, well, I won't say too much of it was different, but just the fact that she had that sister that we already knew, and the sister wasn't in the book. One thing that was interesting was that Tasha had a cat on the planet, and I like how the book says that she didn't name her cat because on New Paris they didn't know that Earth had the custom of having pets and naming them. So Tasha just had this cat that she took care of, but it didn't have a name. But on the show, in the episode where no one has gone before, Tasha had that flashback scene where she was on her home planet and she was holding a cat. So that was great that Jean Lorrah remembered that and put the cat in this story. And you'll remember how the cat on the episode was an orange cat. And thinking about it again made me think, Data had a cat that looked a lot like that. And so then it makes you wonder, and the book doesn't say this, but I thought maybe the reason Data got a cat was because Tasha told him about her cat. And Data even got the same kind of cat, because maybe that's the kind that Tasha must have told him she had an orange cat too. I just thought that was neat.
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, about Data and the cat. But yes, now that you say that makes me think about that.
Yes, it's interesting, but behind the scenes on the show, it might have even been, they might have used the same cat on the show for Tasha's cat and for Spot, but at least in the beginning, until they got a different cat to play Spot. But Tasha in the book, you can see a lot of her development, and the book kind of uses flashbacks because it showed her on her home planet and shows her currently on the Enterprise, and then it goes back to show some other things about her first days in the academy and training, and then goes back to her a time when she's on a current mission with Data where they had to take a shuttlecraft to another planet. So what do you think about how Tasha was used in this story?
I thought she did a really great job. I thought it was really fascinating to read not just about her life on her home planet, but what happened to her after she was rescued. So she was rescued by Starfleet when she was 15, and she had a mentor, one of the men who rescued her, Daryl Aiden, who took her kind of under his wing until they got back to Earth. And then she went to school and, wanted to join Starfleet because Starfleet is, the organization that rescued her. And, that's really what she had in her mind, that she wanted to be a part of because she really, it changed her life for the better. And then we get to follow her as she goes through Starfleet Academy and her training. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done, and it really fit with her character. And it was just great to get background into what her life was like.
And one of the stories early in the book was her training in Starfleet, where they had her in a holodeck simulation where she was on a mission to a planet and found out there were Orions there, and there was the danger that she might get captured by the Orions and sold into slavery. And then this turns out to be just a holodeck. She doesn't even know it's a holodeck simulation at the time, because they had affected her mind so that she would think it was all real. And this was all part of a Starfleet test to see how she would handle the situation. But to me, it was disturbing in the book, just because I would like the chapter before that had talked about the gangs on her home planet, and then you're reading about how she might become a slave, and I thought, oh, this is such a depressing book. But I was glad they got out of that later and got on to other stories.
Yeah, that was and of course, as a reader, you don't know going into it that it's just a stimulation. You don't find that out until later. So you think that she really is on this mission where some of her the other cadets that were with her have died in a crash, and she's the only survivor. And then she has to witness this scene where there's some Starfleet or Federation personnel who were supposed to be observing the planet, in disguise, because the planet is not, they're not warp capable yet. And these Federation observers have gotten in league with the Orions and are going to be selling the natives into slavery. And so, yeah, that is pretty depressing until you read at the end that it's all a part of her training to see how she would react. And it's kind of interesting because they put her in a sort of a no-win situation where it's really morally ambiguous, the choices that she has to make. She's forced to choose between should she help the natives because she doesn't want them to be sold into slavery, have the Orions take them, but then she'd be interfering and breaking the Prime Directive. And so she has to make this choice, and it's really not a choice. And that's kind of the whole point of the exercise, that, sometimes you're going to be faced with these decisions where there really is no right answer, and you can only do the best that you can. And she gets very frustrated by that because she wants to know what's the right thing to do. So that's kind of like one thing that sticks with her whole life, is, when is it, when I'm in these situations, like, sometimes things are not black and white. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was something that she thinks back to when she, later on in this story. And I also saw Yar as sort of a Pygmalion character, or My Fair Lady, where they said she was a young girl when Starfleet first found her, and she didn't know these, all the social graces of Starfleet, or even how to talk the correct way, having the manners and everything. And Daryl Aiden is supposedly the one who groomed her in a lot of ways and talked to her about these things. I just kind of saw it that way, or associated her with Pygmalion.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, I think the book, it could have gone into a lot more detail. It kind of zooms past a lot of her, they spend some time talking about her life on her home planet. And then it's kind of like, then she's in Starfleet Academy, and they kind of fast forwarded a bit through the intervening years. I mean, we know she went to school and she spent some time on the Federation ship with Daryl Aiden, but you don't really get to see her transformation from a somewhat like wild child to the person that she became. And I would have liked to have seen that, but I mean, I guess I understand it would have maybe been a pretty long novel if they had included that. So,
well, as far as the story, they didn't want to spend too much time on one part of the story. So then getting to the main story where they were on Treva, and Tasha got kidnapped by a warlord, and then they find out that he's not really that bad. That the story, you're thinking, oh, so this guy is really the good guy instead of the one who's actually in control of the planet. But as far as Tasha, during this time, I like how she was trying to understand what the people where she was, and still trying to get back in touch with Data, and seeing how everything was going on the planet, and discovering how things were not as they seem. So her training went well, and the book always says like that Starfleet gives the best training possible. So as a security officer, she was still on the ball and still trying to do her duty the best she could.
Yes, it was an interesting twist about the whole thing with Treva, and that initially, I don't know if I'm not sure if we say Nolavia or no, I was calling her Nolavia, but I'm not sure.
I said Nalavia, but okay, either
Nolavia. Okay,
way.
I'll go with Nolavia. The president of Treva, makes this appeal to Starfleet, and Picard sends Data and Yar there. And, initially it makes it sound like, oh, she's the good person. She's the democratically elected president, and she's under siege from these warlords who want to ruin the planet. But Tasha and Data are both smart enough to know that, you can't just take everything at face value. And they do some research before they get to the planet, and once they arrive, and come to realize that Nalavia is not the person that she seems, and that she's not really telling them the whole truth about the situation, including the warlord, Recon or Rykon. That's another one. How are you pronouncing that?
Riken?
Rykon. Okay.
I'd say Riken, yeah. You just sort of, yeah, since we both read the book and didn't do, like, I don't even know if this one's on Audible, but yeah, reading it, and you just sort of make up your own way to pronounce the names. Um, and also you have Data, and there was the discussion of what happened between, or at least, I mean, Tasha and Data are always thinking about what happened between them in the episode The Naked Now, where they were intimate. And Tasha is like, she keeps thinking like, how does Data react to that? She's not sure, like because he hasn't mentioned it, and she says like he must have taken her too literally when she said it never happened. But Data goes through some development in this story too, and again, this book it came out right before the episode Measure of a Man. Yeah, this book was in January of '89, and then Measure of a Man was February of '89. Because this book mentions Data being sentient, and it says Starfleet Academy would only takes people if they're sentient. But Measure of a Man had to determine that Data was sentient. So that's just something, another problem with books that are written while the show was still on.
Yes, and interestingly enough, one of the things that comes up is that when Tasha is reunited with with Daryl Aiden on the planet Treva, one thing that she appreciates is initially he and his friends and the people he's working with, they just keep referring to Data as a robot, and she's trying to explain to him that he's a person, and they don't get it. But once they meet Data, she appreciates the fact that from that point on, Daryl Aiden treats Data just like as if he is the person, and he recognizes that he is sentient.
Yeah, that was something that's like, it's frustrating at first when you keep reading about Dare, saying, Dare is short for Daryl Aiden. They called him Dare. He thought of Data as a robot, and yeah, the way he kept saying it and all that, and yeah, so disrespectful at first, and you're going, please don't say that, because I like Data, So, but yeah, it was neat that once he met him, and Riker the warlord, once he met Data, they both really respected him. They did see him as more than a robot.
Yeah, and so that kind of mirrors what happens, in Measure of a Man and in other episodes of Next Generation, where people who don't know Data or in the beginning, they just assume he's just like a machine, like a robot, and once they get to know him, they realize, oh, he is a person.
Yeah, even Dr. Pulaski at first. I mean, the way she referred to him as it, and but and other things about Data, there was some line in the book too where they mentioned that he had like he had intimate relations with other people before. It was like, oh, someone had to throw that in. There was some comment that implied that. But I
Yes,
do
I
thought that
noticed
it,
that too.
yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like, okay, what's that about?
yeah. But Data and Tasha were both people who were rescued by Starfleet. That's a big thing to have in common, and for both of them, it's the reason they wanted to join Starfleet. So I love that how the author caught on to that and knew it was just such a great idea to throw the two of them together in a story.
Yeah, I really like that too. And so the reason that they ended up being thrown together was because Nalavia, who was the president of Treva, is a very beautiful woman, and I think Picard noticed right away that Riker and some of the men were kind of, drooling over her. So he wanted to not send Riker or a man who might be, charmed by her. And the reason he sent Tasha and Data was because, she's a woman and he's an android. So they're not, well, she's a straight woman and he's an android. So he didn't have to worry about, Nalavia putting her charms on one of the other crew members. And so that was an interesting reason that they got thrown together. And then they had to spend several days in the shuttlecraft together on their way to the planet, which gave them a lot of time to have, together where there's not much going on, and they had to interact. And it was kind of the first time they had interacted since their romantic encounter. And so it was a little awkward because Yar had been avoiding him intentionally since that time, and he kind of recognized that. But he wasn't sure that she was really avoiding him. He thought, maybe she's just really busy, and I'm just, imagining this. But it was some cute scenes in the shuttlecraft where they got to kind of interact more, and she got to talk a little bit more to him about her past and her life in Daryl Aiden and things like that. And he also was thinking about, his always thinking about being human and different things, what makes a human. And so that was a good, I thought that was good how the author threw them together like that, and then gave them the opportunity, a forced opportunity where they had to interact with each other and kind of get over their embarrassment, or her embarrassment anyway.
Yes, good development of the characters, especially considering that the show had not been on very long when this was written. And Data, so it says that Data has a flirtation program. And the thing is, I'm doing a Next Generation rewatch now, and so I just recently saw the episode In Theory where Data has a, quote, girlfriend, unquote. And in that episode, he actually, like since another woman expressed interest in him, it says that he downloaded or uploaded all these programs into his memory banks about how to flirt and how to have a romantic relationship. So according to that episode, he really didn't flirt, or it wasn't already part of his programming. But this book says yes, he was programmed with it from the beginning. So that was an interesting thought. I mean, to have that, so he accesses his program, so he knows how to respond to a woman who's flirting with him, because Nalavia does flirt with him, and he kind of in some way returns it. He acts charming with her, kind of the way Riker would, but charming but also aloof, like not acting like he's giving into it, but acting like he's kind of interested. That was an interesting interplay between the two of them, and seeing how Data could actually do this.
Yeah, it was interesting that to see that Data had this supposedly flirtation program that he could turn on and off, because we didn't really, that didn't exist on the show, so that was one difference.
And then another quote from the book, something, because I think it was Riken that mentioned to Data, like maybe someday we'll be able to put a human in an android body, and then that makes you think, oh yeah, that just happened on Picard, yeah. And
yes, that's exactly what I thought when I read that, and I was like, well, she couldn't have known that back in 1989, right?
Right. So yeah, some things, are just really good. And the fact that so the book was called Survivors, and part of that was Riken talking to Data and said, and Riken was a very older person in this, so he was saying he's a survivor. He outlived his wife and his daughter, and he was talking to Data, and he knows that Data will probably outlive all of his loved ones. So these people will survive their loved ones. That was just that was really good development too, and thinking, and that Gene Lorrah put a lot of thought into Data's character about these things.
Yes, it did make me really sad reading the parts because here, Data is kind of looking to Riken for wisdom, and he's been fighting for his people his whole life and has seen not just his wife and his daughter die, but he basically all of his friends and the people he served with, he's the last one. And so he was kind of telling Data, that might not be such a good thing that you're going to outlive everyone, because when you're the one who survives, then all you can think about is how you're the last one. Everyone, the sad memories of the people who have left. So yeah, it was very poignant.
And then also getting to Daryl Aiden.
Oh wait, Daryl. Sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to say one more thing about Data before I move on to Daryl Aiden, which was one interesting point that she made. There's part where he has some memories. It talks about how he can put his memories, not just like the flirtation program, which you can turn on and off, which he's aware that he has, but she kind of made it, she said, like everything else he had ever experienced, the memories were available should he lift the prohibition. So that he's able to like put a prohibition on, oh, I'm not going to access these memories. But then it made me wonder, if it's a prohibition, then how is he going to know that they're there to ever decide that he wants to access them? Just an interesting thought.
Yeah, sort of a dilemma for him. Yeah, and like, can he put things out of his mind? I mean, we kind of see him, if he's ordered not to say something, then he won't say it. But does it actually go from his memory? But yeah, that was another interesting thing about Data.
Yeah, so it just made me wonder how if he's able to put things aside and say, oh, I don't, I'm not going to access those memories, then how does he know that they're there? It's just kind of interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, and the same thing with Tasha Yar saying it didn't happen. So he knew that she didn't want him to mention it again. And so with Daryl Aiden, the one who rescued Tasha, and of course, really it was part of a team, the Starfleet team that rescued Tasha Yar, but Daryl was the one that was in charge of the team. And so Daryl talks in this book about, he's talking with Tasha, and he's saying that the two of them are also survivors because they have lived a long time. And and Tasha went through so much in her past. But Daryl was an interesting character. The thing is, he's like, what did the book say, about 10 years older than Tasha? She's 15 when he rescued her. But there is an age difference there. But the two of them wind up falling in love, and they even get engaged. But then there's an incident with Daryl where he's accused of doing something, conspiring with the Orions, and he's found guilty and drummed out of Starfleet. So, and then Tasha doesn't see him for a long time. And when she's on this mission to the planet Treva, he happens to be there as a mercenary helping the so-called warlord Riken. What did you think about the way that this character developed, Daryl Aiden?
He was an interesting character. So he's one of the, as you mentioned, one of the team that rescues Tasha Yar when she was 15. Yeah, they made it sound like he must have been in his early 20s. I'd say probably you're right, about 10 years older, because at that point he was the chief of security. So he had to be, he probably wasn't fresh out of Starfleet Academy. So I think maybe mid to late 20s. But they said it wasn't a big age difference. But still, at first I thought, oh, it's kind of a little creepy because he kind of took her under his wing, and helped her and paid for her schooling and was kind of like a mentor to her. So in some ways, it was a little weird that they then later developed a relationship. But she was, at that point, an adult, and it was a decision that she made on her own, and he did not he didn't make any advances or act inappropriately in any way when she was younger or, during the time when she was in school. So, yeah, I mean, so I could see that, them falling in love, especially because, she has these memories of him being the person who rescued her. And when she's in Starfleet Academy taking her security training, he's actually, after having served some missions, he's back in Starfleet Academy taking some refresher training courses. So they're in some of the courses together, and that's kind of where they reconnect and fall in love. And they get engaged. And he seems like a really great guy, always sort of pushing her to do her best, but and very intelligent person. And then the situation happens where he supposedly, allegedly, conspires with the Orions to. They're supposed to be stealing some dilithium off of the ship that he and Tasha are on, and the Orions end up killing a lot of people. And he, gets convicted and sent to a rehabilitation colony, but escapes. And Tasha has a really hard time believing that he's guilty at first, but the evidence just seems, pretty overwhelming that he's guilty. And she finally kind of has to accept that he is. And she does see this kind of dark, angry side to him during that time that she hadn't seen before. So maybe that helps her to, accept his guilt. But it's a big betrayal for her. Someone who she thought was the ideal Starfleet person is found guilty and responsible for the deaths of many people she knows. So this is a pivotal moment in her life. And when she's reunited with him years later on Treva, he's been acting as a mercenary and living outside the law. So it's a big change. And of course, we find out that, talking about the early, as I was reading the story about what happens to him, at first I was like, I don't know if I can really buy that this character, even though we do see a bit of a dark, angry side, it just seemed like too much of a character, a change in character for this person who's always doing the right thing to suddenly be selling out his crewmates to the Orions and being responsible for their deaths. So I kind of had a hard time believing that, and I felt like, I don't know if this is really believable. It seemed like a stretch to me. But of course, at the end of the story, we find out it all makes sense. So, but I'll leave that for later.
I kind of felt the same way about it, just that so he was accused of conspiring with the Orions, and I think the way Star Trek stories are usually written, I mean, if Tasha Yar really loved him, and she was already engaged to him at this time, she would have done what she could to prove him innocent. She would have researched it more and figured it out. That's usually the way it works out. And instead of him just being so surprised, yeah, and the way she kind of acted like she was just going to let him go. I mean, she didn't seem to work hard enough to fight for him. So that part, yeah, that was a little hard to believe that it would have happened that way. And then also finding out that he was a mercenary, and that he was so good at it. He had become, like a legend, as and he had some other assumed name. I forgot what it was, but his other name Tasha had heard before, because she had heard like, oh, this person is a legend, but she didn't know that it was Daryl Aiden until she ran into him again.
The Silver Paladin.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, it's just strange that a former Starfleet officer and someone who did not do what he was accused of, and suddenly he becomes so good at being a mercenary. Somehow that didn't ring true to me. So so some parts of his character I kind of had trouble with.
Yeah, and then I mean, so we eventually find out at the end of the story that he really was innocent.
Yeah,
and
he
that
was.
he had been framed. Now I can forgive her a little bit for not, discovering the truth, because it really took Data was the only one who was able to find out that he had been framed by the Orions, because they had done such a good job of hiding the information in the computer and setting him up, that Data was the only person capable of discovering that. But I do agree with you. I felt like she did kind of give up on him a little too easily. Yeah, the evidence was there, but she just kind of was like, okay, I guess he's guilty. And, and I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, if the evidence is so overwhelming on the one hand, could she have thought otherwise? Could she really have believed he was innocent when it seemed at that time, completely certain that he was guilty? But hard to say. But it was a little odd that when they reunite, and maybe it's because she's gotten older, before Data discovers that he really was innocent, when they meet again on Treva, and she rekindles her romance with him, knowing that it's a temporary, that it's not going to last, because she's going to be in Starfleet and he's going to continue to be, living outside of the Federation rules and as a mercenary. But it doesn't seem to bother her. Like, and it was a little weird too to me. Like, she's just like, okay, we're going to spend this time together as lovers, and just forget about the fact that, he was guilty, or that, she believed he was guilty of these crimes. It was kind of, that didn't really make as much sense to me either.
Yeah, those little things at the end. Yeah. And so the book does go into, so I understand that, like they said, this book, it was written after the episode Skin of Evil. Like, we already knew that Tasha was dead. And so that's the reason that they actually allowed, or Jean Lorrah, to write this book, because they allowed the book after Tasha was dead. They didn't want to have a character that went into her past, or the past of a character that was still on the show, because they thought the show might still be developing that character later. So they didn't want a book about it. So they thought at the time it was safe to have a book about Tasha'S past after she had died. But anyway, so the book does go into Tasha's death in Skin of Evil. And so the irony of that is that, calling Tasha a survivor in the book, but then she does die in the book. That was just an interesting irony that they had. But it is neat that, like, we do know she's going to die, so they actually put that in the book. They didn't make you try to think that, like, that they didn't know what was going to happen to her when at the time that the book was written.
Yeah, I didn't even consider the irony of that, but you're right. That should have been obvious. I did appreciate how, of course, we know going into it what's going to happen to her, but I wasn't sure of the exact time frame as far as the book, like how much longer after this book took place that she died. And it's not too long afterwards, because they had, they deal with it. And one thing that I did like, even though I didn't necessarily buy the story of the reunion between Daryl, Aiden, and Tasha, was that when Picard informs Data, Data is going to be the one to bring the news to Daryl Aiden of Tasha's death. And Picard agrees that he thinks he's the appropriate person to do that, since he knew both of them.
And that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's one line that he said that I just loved. And Picard says, one of the hardest lessons of life is that there are times when the best we can hope for is a draw, when the battle is with one's own conscience. And that is the most difficult of all, because Data's talking about, the memorial service that they're going to have for Tasha. And he's not really sure that he understands the point of a memorial service. Like, what is it for a human? What does it mean? And he tells Picard that he thinks that it's not done for the person who died didn't leave the memorial for them. It's for the people that have been left behind. And when he tells Picard this, then he doesn't think he understands. Picard says that, now that you said that, I understand that you understand exactly what the purpose is, and tells him this. So I really like that. I thought that was a really good ending.
That was good. Yeah, that's some good lines in this book. I mean, I've read other books by Jean Lorrah, so I know she's good. So, yeah. So So bringing us to the final thoughts, what did you think about the book overall?
I really enjoyed it. There were, like I said, there were times with the romance between Tasha and Darylene where I was kind of like, But overall, I thought it was a great story. It didn't disappoint me. I've really liked every book by Jean Lorrah that I've read, and this one was no different. I thought it was a really good book all around, and definitely one you want to read if you're a fan of Tasha Yar or Data.
I thought so too. It was a good story. It was well written, and I liked the way she developed Tasha and Data and their personalities. I think they worked well together, and it was a good adventure and romance story. It had, a lot of different elements. It was very entertaining the way it came together, even though, like we said, a few problems with it, but overall, yeah, I liked it too. Okay, so I guess that wraps it up. So thumbs up from both of us.
Yes, 2 thumbs up.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.